you're going to find out why you should be using Deathshroud Terminators in your Death Guard list, as well as how to use them most effectively in this video. But first, let's head over to a quick introduction. Before we find out how we most effectively use the Deathshroud Terminators, first we need to find out the key attributes about their model. So they are elite Terminators in the Death Guard Codex, and a unit of 3 of them costs 150 points. Their main idea is that they are an extremely resilient unit, obviously having toughness 5, 3 wounds, a 2-up save, and a 4-up invulnerable save, and then when you put that together with the disgustingly resilient, meaning they take 1 less damage, they are extremely difficult to kill. And also when I play them, I have known that they can soak up a large amount of firepower. Although the Deathshroud do have some kind of range attack with their Plague Spurt gauntlets, which are short-range pistols, having strength 3 and no armor penetration means that it's really difficult for them to do damage, and although they might take off 1 or 2 wounds, they're not really the main focus of the Deathshroud, as in terms of their hitting abilities, the main focus is their melee attack, having obviously 4 attacks per model and 5 with the champion. So when the unit charges, you're having 13 attacks, and those 13 attacks can do a lot of damage, particularly as the weapon, the Man Reaper, and I'm going to cover this a bit more later, so you should definitely stick around. But the weapon is super useful and does a large amount of damage, so they are super effective in melee, and that is their main focus in terms of firepower. So now we're going to head on to why you should be using these Deathshroud Terminators, before obviously we get into how you can use them most effectively. So why should you use the Deathshroud Terminators? Now, the main benefit of the Deathshroud is that they are extremely good for the amount of points that they are worth. Now, what I mean by this is that they're only 150 points for the unit, which if you're playing a match worth 2,000 points, that's under a tenth of your whole army. However, I know from experience that when you use these, because they are such a threat, and they are also so resilient, they're usually going to take up a lot more than a tenth of the enemy's firepower. And you'll understand this once I talk about how good they are in melee, but first I'll just cover why they are so resilient and why they're able to survive a large amount of firepower from the enemy. Now, unlike Terminators in different armies, they are toughness 5 and have 3 wounds. They're automatically already very tough. Plus, obviously, they have the 2-up save and the 4-up invulnerable, so they're really weak to damage, whether with lots of weaker shots from infantry, but then also, obviously, the heavier shots from, like, tanks. Half of them will be dismissed by the invulnerable save. And, of course, you have the disgustingly resilient rule, which subtracts 1 from the damage. So if you do have a tank and let's say it does D3 damage, instead of having an even chance of doing 1, 2 or 3 damage, it's going to 2/3 of the time do 1 damage and then the rest of the time only do 2 damage. And although lots of this is similar with other Death Guard units like the Blightlord Terminators, the Deathshroud do really stick out given they are quite cheap for the amount of resilience, particularly when you compare them to like Lord of Contagions or Lord of Virulence. Now onto their melee abilities, so there's no point having a super resilient unit if they're just never going to get shot at because they're useless and never going to get any objectives because they're completely immobile. So although I did say that their firepower isn't that powerful, when they do get into melee, the amount of damage they do will be extremely good. They attack with the Man Reaper, having 13 attacks between the whole squad, obviously with a champion, and even if you have lost 1 or 2, they're still going to do a decent number of attacks. Obviously you can attack with the Cleave and the Scythe, and I'm going to talk about later when I talk about how you should use them, which ones are optimal for which situations, but it's really nice having some flexibility because obviously the Scythe is going to be better against light and maybe some heavier infantry because it's got the double hit rolls but less damage, whereas the Cleave is going to be more focused for characters as well as vehicles, having the extra strength armor penetration as well as more damage, but obviously you only get half the amount of attacks and you have to subtract 1 from the hit rolls, although when you're already hitting on 2, which is quite good, that's not really much of a deficit. Now obviously there are some negatives to the Deathshroud, mostly that they're immobile. This isn't just an issue of the Deathshroud, it's an issue with all of the Death Guard having only that 5-inch move. It might take you quite a few turns before you're actually able to get into melee, and they are very likely to be targeted by the enemy. And I don't really think that's too much wrong, because they're only being targeted because they are so good, and when they are targeted they're just going to be soaking up firepower while you can allow other units to get in and grab objectives and kill the enemies. Also, another thing to remember is that a game of 40k isn't necessarily just about last man standing wins, as obviously that's what Deathshroud are really good at, really tough and do a lot of damage, and it is also about getting on objectives and achieving your missions, which Deathshroud, obviously being a bit immobile, they're not the best at. However, it is still quite important to be able to have some units that, although they might not be the most mobile, they are resilient and good in firepower and overall going to do a lot more damage to the enemy than the enemy are going to do to you, and the Deathshroud is one of those units, and in my opinion it should be used in most lists. Now I'm going to be moving on to the final part of the video, which I know you've all been waiting for, which is how to most effectively use the Deathshroud Terminators. Now for the bit you've all been waiting for, the tactics and how to use the Deathshroud Terminators. So first of all, I think it's important to go over the war gear options. Now obviously they all come equipped with the Man Reaper and the Plague Spurt Gauntlet. However, you have the option to spend 5 more points on giving the champion or captain or whatever you want to call him a second Plague Spurt Gauntlet. Now things to know about the Plague Spurt Gauntlet, I talked about them briefly earlier, but basically it's not going to do much damage against light infantry. It might kill 1 or 2 or do the odd wound against heavy infantry, but overall it's not that great. The only good thing about it is it automatically hits, so if somebody charges you, you might be able to kill 1 or 2 of their small infantry in Overwatch, which is going to be super useful because it means they won't be able to damage as much of your Deathshroud. So it's not bad, and whether you want to spend the extra 5 points to give the champion an extra Plague Spurt Gauntlet is basically just completely your choice. I usually do it based on like how my list is looking. If I've got 5 spare points, I can just buy it, or if I think, okay, I will want it, and then my list is like 5 points over what I want it to be, then I'll just take it off. It's one of those that it doesn't really make too much difference either way. Now, how you use the Man Reaper, which is obviously the main weapon, does the hard-hitting, good damage in melee. Obviously, it has 2 different abilities, and I'm going to go over which ones you want to use in which situations. Now you can obviously, if you want to, you can combine the cleave with the, I think it's Hives of Contagion, correct me if I'm wrong, stratagem, where you pay 2 CP and any excess damage is still carried over. So if you're fighting against like really heavy infantry but they only have 1 wound, then you could use that. Though I personally recommend that if something does only have 1 wound, it's best to go with the Scythe. Obviously their toughness is already reduced from your contagion ability, so plus the +1 strength, you're attacking at 5 strength, you're hitting on 2s, you're going to get a lot of hits, large amount of them are going to wound. The -1 AP is really good as they've got like a save of 2+ or 3+, just means a lot more of yours will go through, but remember it's already 26 attacks if you've still got your full unit there, and yeah, because obviously 2 attack hit rolls instead of 1, you're going to be able to burn through large units of infantry, particularly very light infantry, really quickly. And the cleave ability, I usually use it against like characters, so if you've got your captains or whatever that you're fighting against, that AP3 means they're usually going to have to back to their invulnerable save if they don't have one, then you're going to be able to go through and do a lot of damage on them. Plus you've got strength 7 and they've got -1 toughness, so you're going to be wounding and hitting most of the time. Though you do have -1 hit roll, which is a bit annoying. Obviously, also if you're tanking tanks and vehicles, then you'll want to be using the cleave, but you're not usually going to be attacking them. Although the Deathshroud will still do good amounts of damage to them because these units are really good. Other thing to note is, although they are able to be deep striked or teleport striked, I don't really think it's worth it, and I think most people will agree, because obviously at first they're not going to be in for a few turns, and if one of the things you want to use Deathshroud for is to save a bit of firepower, then that's not that great, obviously, as I mentioned a bit earlier. And the problem is you can't move it once you've deep striked on that turn, so either you make a 9-inch charge, which it can happen, but the chance of it's very low, and you will do a time of damage with placebook gauntlets, but it's not really worth it. If you really want deep striking Terminators, then you can go with the Blightlord Terminators, because they've actually got some sort of decent ranged weapons, and you could have a unit of those combined with ranged and melee. But the Deathshroud, it's not really worth it, and obviously once you miss the charge, they're either going to just obliterate you with their close range shooting, or if they're or they'll just simply move away. Most armies move faster than Deathshroud, than Death Guard, so they're just going to easily be able to get away and you won't be able to do much damage. And even though it is useful having a unit in Deep Strike, if you do, Deathshroud's not the unit that you want to have in Deep Strike. Also, another thing to note, so when we're talking about how they're going to work well as a push, they often work really well with characters. So obviously they have the bodyguard ability, which means that characters nearby can't be harmed with ranged attacks, which is really useful because it means that, particularly like Lord of Virulence and the Lord of Contagion, if you want to know which of those are better, I've got a video, click on it in the top right, although watch this first. Oh yeah, and subscribe, because I'm going to be doing more videos like this if you want to know. And also tell me, how can I make these videos better? I've not been uploading in a while, sorry about that. Anyway, back to the video, let's not get distracted. So, for example, when you're making a push, if you've got these, they're going to take up a bit of hits. Maybe one of them will die, but then once they get in, they'll also be able to attack with Lord of Virulence or Lord of Contagion with them. Then you're really going to be doing damage, and wherever these are going to be moving, the enemy's going to have to get really far away, which unfortunately they can do because Death Guard's kind of rubbish at mobility. But if it's an important objective, then these are really nice. So I often like taking these with my Lord of Virulence. It's just really cool, because then you can just absolutely obliterate anything in melee, and they will never have a chance to fight back. Also, with unit size, I say it's best to stick to 3, and obviously you can have more. Obviously the champion is better, so a unit of 6 is just objectively worse than 2 units of 3, because the 2 units of 3 will have 2 champions, which obviously have 1 more attack than the rest of the unit, so there's not much point putting them in more than 3. I suppose you could make an argument for putting them in a unit of 4 if you've got the right points cost, but I really don't think it's worth it. Stick to 3. If you want a lot of them, put in 2 units. And also, there aren't any particularly useful stratagems. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, there are some sort of general ones like increase wound rolls, increase hit rolls, but nothing that's super necessary with these, unlike certain units. I think Poxwalkers might be one of them, where stratagems really make a massive difference. With these Deathshroud stratagems, yes, they can help. If you really need to kill a unit desperately to win, if it's a massive thing, there are stratagems, but they're quite expensive, and the difference they make is fairly minimal. Although there are certain situations, obviously, when you are going to be using some stratagem. Anyway, that is about it for this video. I think I've sort of covered almost everything to do with the tactics. If you have any ideas and want to talk about how you use the Deathshroud, make sure to stick that in the comments. Really nice to see how different people use units. And also, if you have suggestions for other units you want me to cover, or just other topics, I'm thinking about maybe doing some comparison units. What do you want me to compare? Again, sorry, I've not uploaded in a while. I'm not going to make any promises, but hopefully I'll be back uploading somewhat consistently. So make sure you like and subscribe as well if you did enjoy. But hope you enjoyed. See ya.